last verse of chapter 1, and then we'll go into chapter 2. You know, you remember as we studied about Ruth last week, we remember Ruth was a Moabite. And the Moabites were idol-worshiping people, and Naomi and Amalek and her family had gone to Moab because there was a famine going on in Israel. They was just planning on staying there for a short time, and during that time, Amalek died. Her two sons had gotten married, and then they died. And so the time that she spent in Moab was a disaster. And they decided to leave Israel, and I think that was a wrong decision. They was leaving Bethlehem, which means house of bread. And they determined that they would be better off to go to Moab and to weather the storm of the famine. And now we find that Naomi and Ruth come back to Bethlehem. Naomi talked to her two daughters-in-laws with trying to get them to stay with their own people, because she says, I can't provide for you, and really can't provide for myself. But Ruth determined that she was going to go with her mother-in-law. She even said that where you live, I want to live. Where you die, I'll die. And I want to serve the same God that you serve. So she was completely dedicated and committed to Naomi. And so we find that they come back to Bethlehem, and there was a lot of people questioning, is this really Naomi? She had, her looks had changed. She'd aged quite a bit and had a hard life the last 10 years. And she confirmed that she was Naomi, but she says, I'd rather you would call me Mara, which means bitter. She says, my life has been rough the last few years, but we find that whenever they return back to Bethlehem, her and Ruth, the Bible says that it was in the beginning of the barley harvest. Now here is the beginning of hope for Naomi and Ruth. The barley harvest is the first harvest that comes, that happens then in a couple of weeks after the barley harvest is over. Then you go into the wheat harvest. Then they begin to harvest the olives and the grapes and the figs. So it was a time of harvest that they arrived sometime in April. And another thread of hope is in Ruth 2:1 says, Naomi had a kinsman of her husband, a mighty man of wealth of the family of Amalek. His name was Boaz. So now we're introduced to Boaz, who was kin to Amalek, Naomi's husband. And we're going to find out that is a very important to know this as we get further into our lesson. And Boaz was, says, a mighty man of wealth. He apparently had several fields that he worked, grew different crops. A mighty man of some says means a mighty man of war. a mighty man of the law. So he was well-known, well-respected person. And just so happens he's kin to Naomi through her husband Elimelech. And we find that Ruth tells Naomi, she says, let me go into the field and glean the ears of corn wherever I can find a place to glean. Apparently, Naomi had told Ruth of the laws of the land, and that the way that the poor people would be provided for was through the law of gleaning the harvest. And so Ruth, she knew that because she was a Moabite, that chances was pretty good that she would be rejected by most people, because the Moabites had always been an enemy to the people of Israel, and God had even told them not to have anything to do with them because they was idol-worshiping people. She was also understood that she would probably be a widow the rest of her life. And in those days, there was not much work for a woman to do. You couldn't go outside the family to work because there was not any work to be had. And so her situation was bleak, but she found and understood that a person in their condition, that she could go and glean ears of corn. Now that is the same as barley. You glean the same way with wheat. Now the way that they did this was that they had people, the harvesters, reapers, they would go out and they had a little crescent-shaped sickle in their hand, and they would grab several stalks of the barley and a handful, and then they would cut it off with this sickle. And they would lay it down, and others would come by and they would tie it up in bundles, and then they would haul the bundles in by cart or by donkey, and they would thrash it. And so they would cut just the top part of where the grain was. That's what they would cut off. They'd leave all the rest of it there, and then they would turn their sheep, cattle in on it to eat the rest of it. So we find that she is going to glean in the field. And first of all, we need to understand the laws that the Lord had put in place to take care of the fatherless, the widows, the strangers, the poor. He had his own poverty program that he had started years ago, and I think it is a program that works good for people, and I think we've kind of abused our poverty program, but I want us to notice how the Lord poverty program worked. In Deuteronomy chapter 24, and starting in verse 19, and I'll just paraphrase a lot of this because of time. The Lord tells them that whenever you go into the field to harvest that field, He says if you have a bundle of grain tied up and you kind of forget about it, don't go back and get it. Leave it for the poor and the stranger that need it for their own welfare. He also says that the Lord would bless them that was willing to leave some of this for the poor. Bible says, history tells us that about 30% of the grain was left in the field for those that were poor, strangers. 30%. And they understood, and like Boaz, he understood that God would bless him for doing this. And so they didn't glean in the corners of the field. They left that in each corner. It may be a little harder to get to. They would leave it for the poor. And they did the same thing whenever they harvested the olives off the olive tree. They would just go over the olive tree one time and get the olives, and then the rest of it went to the poor. Grapes, the same way. They'd go through one time and get the grapes, what was left, or maybe what wasn't ready at that particular time, they left for the poor. And the Lord says, I want you to do this, and this will help you to remember that at one time you was a slave in Egypt. And you needed help whenever you was a slave. And the Lord gave them that help. He also tells them that they would not to clear out any of the corners. He says, you leave that grain in the corners. Now, according to Job, he mentions the fact that the wicked, that they would take the grain or the bundle of that was left for the poor. They didn't see any need of helping the poor. So you had people that was probably selfish, and they didn't think that they should help, and they didn't want to leave the grain. They wanted the grain for themselves, so they cleaned the field. They robbed themselves of a blessing from God, but yet they thought they needed the grain that much. But Boaz was a person that he believed God, and he was maybe left more than 30% to help those that was in need. And the Lord wanted the people that was able to work, they could glean in the field. Now, if you wasn't able to work, that's a different story. But if you was able to work, God wanted you to do what you could do. Now, that also helps us to understand about Jesus Christ. That Christ is willing to help us because he knows that there's some things, we're in a situation that we can't help ourselves. We're in sin. We're in a helpless, hopeless condition, but Christ can help us in that situation. Amen. And he wants to help us. He's willing. He knows we're a poor stranger needing help, and he is willing and able to do that. Now, we find that God's poverty program, that he did not give out that grain just free-handed. He wanted you to work to get it. You know, I think that's where we've gone wrong in the United States, that everybody relies on the government. If we're in need of anything, the government should provide it for us. If we have any kind of hard luck, the government should provide for us. They should be sending us a check and taking care of us. But that wasn't the way that the Lord did it. He didn't put people in the soup line. He didn't put them in a bread line. But He gave them the opportunity to help themselves, and it worked good. People was willing to work. They was thankful that they could go into a field and glean the grain. Verse 3 says that Ruth didn't know which field to go to. She's new in town. She don't know anybody. She don't know whose field anybody is. But it just so happens, and you can't keep from believing that God intervened here, and it just so happens that as she's going down the road, and you got fields on both sides of the road and everything, that she decides, I'm going to go into this field here. It just so happened that that field belonged to Boaz, kinsman to Elimelech, Naomi's husband. And Boaz, apparently, he lived there in Bethlehem, and he come out to check on his field and everything, and he talked to the reapers and said, "The Lord be with you." And they answered him, "The Lord bless thee." Now that's a completely different attitude than most employer-employee relationship is. But we see here that Boaz, he knew his workers. He wanted to know about their welfare. They enjoyed working for him. They wanted him blessed because they was being blessed. And so they had a good working relationship there. And Boaz had, a foreman over that particular field, and he noticed Ruth right quick. Maybe he would have been acquainted probably with the other people that's working there, and he noticed, he asked, who is this damsel? Says, I hadn't seen her before. Now see, he's already concerned about those that are in his field. Well, the foreman said, well, she is a Moabite that's kin to Naomi, come back with Naomi, and said she come by this morning and asked if she could glean behind the reapers. And said, I gave her the okay, and she went out there and she went to work and said she'd worked hard all day. Said, in fact, she worked from early morning until now, and she went for just a short time to the house. Now the house there is what we would probably call a tool shed that was built there in the field. They had water there, and there's also a shade there, and apparently she went and got a drink of water and maybe cooled off, and then she went back to work. And so Boaz, he goes and gets acquainted with her, talks to her. He tells her, he says, now, I don't want you to go to any other field to glean. He says, you glean in my fields, and says the way that you'll know which one is my fields is you follow the other women, that they'll go from one field to the other, and you follow them, and you'll be in my field. And says, I've instructed the young men to leave you alone and protect you, take care of you. And he also says, if you get thirsty, you go get you some water that some of the servants have drawn up, and there's plenty of water there for you. And so she was very humble about this, and she couldn't figure out why that he was showing so much grace toward her, because she was a stranger. But she was very appreciative of it. And so she was very surprised at the kindness that had been shown her. And so we find that Boaz did some investigating of Ruth. He probably talked to some of the other servants about who she was, maybe talked to some of Naomi's friends that talked to Naomi and found out a little about her. I wouldn't be surprised if he didn't inquire at the barber shop and beauty shop.
And Facebook.
Find out.
And Facebook.
Yeah, Facebook. And to find out what kind of person she was. A little bit about background about her. And so he was concerned about people that was in his field and worked with him. And he found out that she had been good to Naomi, her mother-in-law, and that she had lost her husband. And so he says, notice, see where you want to come and live here in Bethlehem, and that you want to even worship our God. And so all of this was a plus for Naomi. Then he says the Lord recompense. And that word recompense means pay or reward thy work. In other words, the Lord is the Lord to bless her work, and a full reward be given thee of the Lord, under whose wings thou art come to trust. In other words, she is being protected by God. She's under his protective wings. And so Boaz told her, he says, now at mealtime, I want you to come and eat with us. And you eat the bread, you dip the bread in the vinegar. The vinegar is actually something that's kind of sour. It's mixed with wine, and could be barley, and it's allowed to ferment, but I guess it helped the taste of the bread a little bit, give it some little moisture. And so she sat down beside the reapers, and Boaz would pass some parched corn to her, and she ate the meal with them, and then she got up and she went back to work. She didn't fool around. She was busy wanting to glean the grain, and she worked till late that evening. And Boaz had told his reapers, he says, now you just basically drop a few handfuls of corn where now Ruth is working, and you help her out all you can. And so she, at the end of the day, she had to beat out that grain, and whenever they beat the grain out, most of the time they would use what they call a fate. It's a long limber stick, and they would beat that grain, and that separate the chaff from the barley. And after she did all of that, now this is after it's late to work, she did all of that, she poured it up, and she had a bushel. That's what an ephah is a bushel. Now a bushel of barley, according to our standards today, is 48 pounds. So we're going to say 50 pounds of grain. Now, can you imagine that she's headed home and she's got that sack of grain, 50 pounds on her shoulder, that she's got to carry home? And so when she gets home, Naomi saw how much grain that she had gleaned, and she knew, hey, that's way too much grain for one person to glean in a day. She knew that she had some help, and I want you to notice this. The Bible says that when she ate her noon meal, she ate till she was sufficed, or she was full. And then in verse 18 said, she took it up and went into the city, and her mother-in-law saw what she had gleaned. Notice this. And she brought forth and gave to her that she had reserved after she was sufficed. In other words, after she ate all she wanted, she still had some food on her plate. And what'd she do? She didn't throw it out. She carried it home to Naomi. She didn't waste that food. Naomi needed something to eat, and so she was providing for her. And Naomi began to quiz her on what field she went into. She said, basically, I don't have any idea. All I know is that I went into a field, and I met a man by the name of Boaz, the owner of the field. Well, that was all Naomi needed to hear. She knew that they was kinfolks, and said, he told me to stay with the maidens that went from field to field, not only for the barley harvest, but also for the wheat harvest, which came off normally a couple of weeks after the barley harvest. And so we see that blessings come the way of Ruth because she was willing to work.
You know,
I want us to...
She had a lot of good qualities because, she was fit, and she was stout, and she didn't waste, and she had a compassionate heart for her mother-in-law. So, I would think a guy would be interested in those character, those qualities.
Let's think about God's view of work. Like I mentioned a while ago, it seems as though we today have got the mentality that the government should provide for us. But God's view of work, that it's healthy, it's a good thing to work, it's satisfying, it brings contentment. Whenever we have a productive day, just like we worked here yesterday, we accomplished a lot cleaning around the church. And so there was a lot of satisfaction when the day was over. We had a good day. We fellowshiped together, had a good meal. Everything was a plus. And so that's the benefits of working. Now, here's where God differs than man does a lot of time. Whenever it comes to work, God wants us to do what we can do, and then He'll do what we can't do.
Amen. But we think He can't sometimes.
In other words, we can plant, we can water, but God's the one that gives the increase.
Amen.
He's the one that's going to have to make it grow. But we can do all we can do, and then He'll do what He can do. Mention the fact about people today would turn to the government for the first thing. I was talking to a lady years ago. They didn't turn to the government for help. There wasn't any. She was telling me that they had growing corn down on the Saline River. And corn got up just about knee high, and there's a flood come. Washed the corn, every stalk of corn, everything down the river. And I said, well, what did you do? She says, there's only one thing we could do. We went back down there as soon as the field dried up, and we started plowing, and we started planting again. Said, we didn't know where we were going to make any corn or not, but that's the only thing that we could do. We could plant the corn, and it's up to God. They made a harvest. She said that they grown a good crop that year. And so they had no thought about seeking help some other way. People now we complain, oh, the government's not helping us, and the government's not doing this, doing that. But they didn't have that mentality, that frame of mind. All they wanted was just an opportunity that they could work and better themselves. Now, the Lord tells us because of sin in Genesis chapter 3 and verse 19, in the sweat of thy face thou shalt eat bread. In other words, you've got to work in order to eat bread. The Lord's not just going to give it to you. And Paul puts it in this way in 2 Thessalonians chapter 3 and in verse 10, the last part of it, he says, if any would not work, neither should they eat. Now, a lot of people think Paul was pretty strict with that, but that was his thinking. If you won't work, you won't eat.
Fred, that verse has been very motivational at my house. Malachi even has that verse memorized.
Years ago, this was back before they had nursing homes, things like that. Well, the family would take in people that couldn't take care of themselves, old age and whatnot, and sick, and the family would take care of them. But what they would also do is that if you was able to shell peas, you shell peas. If you was able to shell corn, you shell corn. Whatever you could do, if you could sweep the floor, that was your job. In other words, whatever you could do to pitch in to help, that's what they did. And here's another thing, that the way that the Lord wants us to work, and we also abuse this today, and that is in Exodus chapter 20 and verse 8, he tells us to remember the Sabbath, to keep it holy. 6 days thou shalt labor and do all thy work. Now the Lord says, this is a way that you can be blessed. This is the way that I want you to do it. You work 6 days, do everything you need to do, and on the 7th, it's the day of rest. It's a holy day. It's separate from all the rest. It's set aside so that we can worship the Lord, rest our bodies, so that we can be ready to go to work the next week. And working that way, you will prosper. But here's what we try to do. Later years, in order to get people to work on Sunday, they'll say, I'll pay you time and a half or double time or whatever it might be to entice you to work. Well, a lot of people was willing to do that, give up their Sunday and work. Say, hey, I'm that much ahead. And so we try to do different things that violates what the Lord intended. He also tells us that in Ecclesiastes 5 and 12, he says the sleep of a laboring man is sweet. You know what? He's saying if you put in a hard day's work, you're going to rest at night. You're going to sleep. He tells us in Ephesians 4 and 28, let him that stole steal no more, but rather let him labor, working with his hands the things which is good, that he may have to give to him that needeth. Notice that. He says, you need to quit stealing. You need to go to work. You need to work with your hands so that you will have something that you can help others that are in need. He didn't say so that we can gather everything up for ourselves. He says that we also need to help those, as we're being blessed, we can bless others by helping them that are in need. Now I want to show you about how the Lord works. You know, the children of Israel, you remember they was on the wilderness journey, and they was out of food, and the Lord would provide them with manna. Now he provided them with that manna around the camp, right where they was, but he didn't pour it in a pan or a bowl or a basket for them. It formed early in the morning on the ground, and they had to get up early and go and gather that manna before it got in the heat of the day, because it would melt in the heat of the day. So you had to get up early. He told them, he says, now you go and you gather what you will eat, you and your family. Normally, he said that a man would need about 2 quarts. You gather it, what you need, and he says if you gather more than what you need, it'll go bad. Worms will get in it. You can't use it. Gather what you need. But he also said, if you don't gather all that you want, or if you're late getting out there and to gather it, it's your own fault. It's there. You just got to get up and get what you need. He says, now, I'm not going to put any out there on the Sabbath day. The day before, you gather twice as much, and to provide you for the Sabbath day also. And manna stayed good 2 days. Now, they said that even with those instructions, some people went out there on the Sabbath day to gather it because they didn't do it the day before. There wasn't anything out there. That's kind of the way we still are today. And another thing about this manna right quick, you know, having to take a pot of manna and put it in the Ark of the Covenant, it stayed there for years and years. Didn't go back. Following God's instructions. Everybody can, he put it out there, but it's up to you to do what you can do. And if you do what you can do, you'll be blessed. But if you drag your feet, you don't get up, or you don't want to work, this and that, you can suffer the consequences. The Lord's done all He's going to do. Now, we're talking about people that's able to get it. If by chance they wasn't able to work, well, then other means is made. But I want us to another example of that I am to think about is found in 2 Kings chapter 4. And there we have a story of a woman that she had some sons, but her husband had died, and she had some bills that she couldn't pay. The creditors was knocking on the door, and she didn't know what she was going to do, because they was going to take her sons into slavery until they got that debt paid off. And so she was telling Elisha about this, and Elisha says, well, what do you got in your house? She says, I ain't got anything but a pot of oil, olive oil. Now, she couldn't do anything with it, but he told her, he says, you go and you gather up pots from all your neighbors. Anything that will hold any oil, you borrow it from them and you bring it to your house. Now, they could do that. They could go knock on doors and gather all the empty pots that they would loan them and bring them in. And he told them, he says, now, I want you to start filling these vessels with this oil. They could do that. They could pour and fill these vessels. They poured enough oil to fill every vessel that they had. And then it stopped. Then Elisha says, I want you to take these pots of oil and you go and you sell it. They could do that. They could sell that oil. So they go around, they sell the oil, they have enough money to pay off their debt, and the Bible says, and live thou and thy children of the rest. They had enough over to provide for them for some time.
You know, Fred, that's such a good lesson for us, because as many times as we feel like our checkbook is running really low, if we just give the tithes to the Lord first, somehow He stretches the money out so much better, and it doesn't make sense accounting-wise. It's just a God thing. If you give to Him first, usually you get your bills paid a lot easier.
Well, it's seeing reality, that's His anyway.
Exactly.
It's not yours.
Right, that's what I was thinking, because a lot in your lesson earlier, because a lot of times when we talk about hard work, and we think, well, we've worked hard, we've made this money, we'll spend it how we want, you know, and we forget, well, that's the Lord's money, and we need to give back 10% to Him.
And He also expects us to help those in need.
Right,
you know, if we're not just hold on to our money, but help in any way we can. And see, whenever we are able to work, provide for ourselves and help others, that brings that humbles us, that gives us dignity. we enjoy life much better. I think we're much more contented than we are not wanting to work. So work's a good thing. Anyone have any thoughts, any comments? Let's stand together to be dismissed. Jason, would you dismiss us?
So, let's pray. Lord, I thank you so very much for all your many blessings you bestowed upon us, and I ask that you continue those blessings. I pray that we go out into the world and we're a light unto others, that they can see you through us, Lord. Lord, I thank you for this lesson and what all it shows to us, and I pray we carry it in our heart and do those things that you have spoken for us to do, Lord. Lord, I pray that you forgive our many sins and our shortcomings, Lord. Be with us and guide us, and all this to you in Jesus Christ's name.